Hey everyone, thanks for joining me tonight. Tonight we are going to try to answer a great question that we got about church membership. So the question was, is church membership biblical? Is it even necessary? The context and the questions could go on and on. But this is one that we get a lot because honestly, like, man, people are discouraged. Like, it's really difficult when you're looking for a place and you can't find one. And so, just put all my cards on the table. At the last church that we were members of, I actually wrote and led the membership class. So obviously, I probably have some strong opinions about it, but I'm going to try to be as honest and clear as I can be. I can say that my thoughts on it are different now than they were, but we can get into the details. So we'll start off with this: there is no command in Scripture, right? No 2 Kings 12:13 that says, "Thou shalt be a member of a church," right? It's not in there. But also, I feel like that comes from a mindset that looks at the Bible as a rule book. It comes from a mindset that looks at the Bible as an encyclopedia. Let me look up the word membership and see if church membership's in there. And if it's not, then I don't have to be a member of a church, right? And I don't think that actually, I would say that is not the way that Scripture is supposed to be used, right? So the case that I made in our membership class is honestly it's still the way that I feel, and I'll read you just a portion of the stuff that I wrote for that, and then we can kind of talk about it. So it says here that there are dozens and dozens of texts that describe the relationship between those who are in local church context and their leadership. Look at this. Hebrews 13:17 says, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you." 1 Timothy 5:17, it says that the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. So here's the question: if there is no local church context, who are you supposed to submit to? In 1 Peter 5, it says that he exhorts the elders to be as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. He tells them to shepherd the flock of God that is among them. So it's not shepherd the flock of God everywhere. No, elders are commanded to shepherd the local flock, right? That's the local church context that is among them, that they are appointed to them. So consider the following New Testament commands. In 1 Corinthians 12:12, it says we are members of one body. So listen, all throughout the New Testament it says we're called to love, to greet, to honor, to live in harmony with, to instruct, to comfort, to serve, to bear the burdens of, to forgive, to encourage, to always seek the good of, to exhort, to stir up, to love in good works, to confess sins to pray for, and to show hospitality to one another. How can we fulfill these commands outside of the deep bonds of local church membership? It is not possible to fulfill the commands of the Bible at a heart level outside of the local church. Therefore, it is for your safety that you're part of a local church. 1 Peter 5:8 says, "Be sober-minded and watchful, for your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion." And so, that's a small portion of it, but that really is, I feel, a great picture of the New Testament command. So no, there's not a command that says that you have to be a member of a church, but if you read throughout the New Testament, it's almost implied or understood that that's the context in which honestly, that's the context that the letters were written to, because they weren't written to individuals, right? And I know we're super individualistic, and Paul wrote Ephesians for me, but the reality is he wrote it for the Ephesian church, for the house church, and it was read and copied and sent on and on and on and on. And so the context of all of these letters is a small community of Christ-following believers living life together deeply. And so all of those commands about loving and praying for and all that, that's all done and only can be done in a small local church context, right? And so I don't think that Scripture can be any more clear about the fact that we should be members of church. Now, what about like actual church membership? Well, I mean, I think that we've formalized it because church has gotten away from being able to live those commands out without that, right? So I don't think that that churches need to have a membership class, need to have people sign a legal agreement, or well, maybe a legal agreement, sign a covenant agreement. When I started, that's actually what we did in that membership class, and it didn't change a whole lot. I mean, those who were going to stay and be connected and be all of those things did, and those who weren't didn't. But the goal of the class was to familiarize the body, right? Jesus commands his followers to count the cost, right? And so part of counting the cost for me was putting this information, this is what we want to be and do in this place, right? And I think now my view on church membership is different. I don't know that I would have a class. I think that I would have a class getting to know us and our theology and laying out the mission, but I don't know that I would actually have people become members, because I think that being a member of a church body happens naturally, right? I think that it happens as you get close, as you get involved, as you're sowing your seeds, as you're becoming part of that church body like that. And we don't have to write that down, right? Like when there's family and there's friends who are like family, friends that you would do anything for, and I don't have to write a legal agreement or any kind of agreement with my close friends, letting them know that I care for them and that I'll do whatever I can for them and that I'll be there for them. I don't think it's necessary, right? And so I don't think, and don't hear me wrong, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, honestly. I think the fact that we do membership that way it's a sign of the system that we have for church just not being effective. And it can't be, right? In Corinthians, this is a side note and it's a soapbox and I'm sorry. In Corinthians, Paul calls all the members to have a part, right? That some will have a song and some will have tongues and some will have a message and some will have an interpretation, and that this church service is like this conglomeration of people following Jesus, and everyone's living and working in their gifts, and they're encouraging one another and they're sharpening one another and they're all growing towards Christ together, right? And when you're involved in something like that, and I don't know if you ever have been, if you're involved in something like that, you don't need a piece of paper saying that you're a member, right? But the reality is what church is now is we go to church on Sunday and I listen to someone talk for 45 minutes and I sing 3 songs and I say a prayer and I leave, and that's the reality of it for the majority of people, right? If you're super spiritual, you go to a life group or you go to a Wednesday night church, and the reality is, man, if you're in a good life group, that life group is more like church than church is like church, right? And so I think that having a formalized membership is a sign of the weakness of the current status quo of church, like the lack of deep connection, the lack of authentic service, of authentic friendships and those kinds of things. You shouldn't have to have some sort of document saying that you're a member. But the reality is not even just on the church side. Man, we're super individualistic. If you don't entertain me and my kids, if we're not amazed by it, if I'm not being fed, there's all of these reasons why I'll up and leave and you'll never see me again, and listen, and you'll never know why, right? And so it's a two-way street, and so I think part of the formal membership process is also to try to get a means of being able to understand why people have left, because there's so many churches who have no idea why the back door of their church is so wide open and why so many people have left, right? And so then they're trying to figure it out, and the reality is if we could just be honest and have some mature conversations, it would be super helpful. But that is a message for another time, right? So back up. my answer to the question about is church membership is it biblical? My answer is yes. I believe that from Scripture, you cannot make an argument that you should not be a member in a local church. Now, how do we define member? I would say I'm not worried about papers, I'm not worried about classes, I'm not worried about any of that stuff. Do submit to the leaders that are among you. What I would say is, are you living out those clear commands in Scripture of how to love and serve and encourage and do those things? Like, are you doing that in your local church body? Because that's what it means to be a member, right? And if you're not doing that, if you're not involved like that, I think you have two choices, right? I mean, that's the reality is, if you're not doing those things, are you a member anyway, or are you just going to church, right? We can go to church every Sunday. You can go to as many classes as you want to, and you can check as many boxes and sign as many papers. But the reality is, if you are not living out those commands in Scripture, then you are not a member in the biblical sense of your church, right? We could fill out forms and we can do all the things and we can completely miss it. And the Bible is full of stories of people who did all the external things, but their hearts completely missed it. And so, man, if that's you, I mean, and like always, like I'm not trying to beat you down. I'm not trying to discourage you, none of those things. But the reality is the question, the question is it biblical? And I think it is. And I just want to be clear that you can be doing the motions without the heart, and you're still missing out. And not only is that detrimental to the body, because it's not going to be thriving and whole if people aren't authentically connected, but it's also you. Right? It hurts you to go through the motions and to feel like church is empty, and then the reality is that you miss it. And I think one of the saddest things that I've seen through this whole COVID experience is that there are people I've talked to who have been leaders in their churches for like 20 years, right? And I remember sitting in the office talking to a guy, and he just said that he doesn't think he's ever going to go back. He's like, I can watch the songs, and I can watch the sermon from home. I don't have to get all dressed up. I don't have to go anywhere. Why would I ever go back? And it's a sad reality for two reasons. For one, because all he's getting out of church membership is songs and a sermon, right? That is not church like we see in the Bible, right? And two, for the church, like, how could we be so powerless, like so weak that people are just like, I could do without it, right? And so, man, if that's you, like if you're struggling, if you can't find a place where you feel like you're at this church and nobody cares about you, nobody sees you, and all of, man, so I would say first, and this is just I used to be a pastor, life group pastor, and I would say, man, be the change that you want to see. So like and it's hard, like at home, I don't like complaining. I just don't. But my thing is, like, if you come to me with a complaint and a solution, man, I'm all in. Like, and I'll have your back. I'll help you out. And so that was what my thing always was with life groups and all of that at the church. It's like, man, if you're struggling, then nobody has time and everybody's rushed and nobody spends time. Then what can you do to start that trend, right? So if you're in a life group and it feels cold and clinical, open up your home, right? Bring some snacks, bring an icebreaker, bring a game, volunteer. Like, hey, let's all go to the zoo, or let's go to the park, right? Like, make some change, make some efforts, make some suggestions, be a part of what you want to see. Because the reality is that it's not the life group leader, it's not the pastor, it's not the life group pastor, it's none of those things, right? To be a member of the church is to be an active part of the body, right? So be a part, bring those things to you, and if it doesn't work, then let's look at whether or not this is the place for you, right? Because the reality is like, you've got to be able to fulfill those commands in Scripture, and if you can't do it there, then maybe you need to find a place. But I think that you cannot do that with integrity unless you've done all that you can do, because maybe your voice, your gift, your passion is what that body is needing. And the reality is that you're feeling that way. There's other people in there who are too, right? But the church is not great at empowering people to do the things that they see that need to be done. And so I'm telling you, if you're there and you're at a church and you feel overlooked, you feel disconnected, you feel all those things, make sure that you're making the effort to do those things yourself, right? And if you're not in church and you've been hurt and you've been let down and you're struggling with whether you need it, I'm telling you that church community, man, it's hard, right? And you can get let down, you can get hurt, and don't listen to all those Facebook posts about, if you're hurt by the church and so you quit going, then you didn't love God and all. Man, forget all that, because the reality is that church done right calls you to open yourself up like no other thing, right? There's no sports, there's no event, there's no team, there's no business that calls you to the level of transparency and authenticity that church does. And so being hurt by the church or in church is like tantamount to a family betrayal or a spousal betrayal. Like it hurts, and it takes time, and it takes healing. And so if that's you and you're struggling with whether it's even worth it, let me tell you, as an introvert, as someone who doesn't enjoy, like when we did life groups, when Amanda wanted to do like a fun night, like to get to know, actually build relationships, I was like, do I have to go, right? But the reality is that we need that, right? We need those things. And so I'm telling you, as someone who doesn't love those things, that life group and true, like real church community has been one of the most powerful things, one of the most powerful stimulants for growth, for change, for overcoming in our life. And so if you're there and you've been hurt, and find a place, go with a friend, go with a family, go with people that you know and that you know you can trust, but don't give up on church, because I promise you there is no plan B. The church is the means that Christ has chose to usher in his kingdom on earth. Like that is the way. And so for you to experience the fullness of what Jesus died for you to have means that you need to be a part of a thriving church body. And it takes time, and it takes effort, and it's scary, but it's worth it. So that's what I got. That's what I got. I could talk about this for 40 more minutes. So man, if you have comments, if you have pushback, if you disagree, if you agree, if you have experiences or testimonies, share them. You could record them, post them as comments, send them to me. Let's have a conversation. Like, let's encourage one another with wherever you're at in your journey in this thing called life following Christ. So let me hear your stories. Let me hear how you feel about it. You guys have a good day. Thanks.